Welcome tonight to the Central School District 13J Budget Committee meeting. We are here at the campus of Western Oregon University. We appreciate them allowing us to do this in such a way that we can easily connect with all of our budget committee members, as well as members of the community who are interested in the process of the school district budget. Just a couple of things before we do the flag salute and the roll call. I just wanted to, first of all, let folks know that one of our recent budget committee members, someone who served with us for several years, Tim Flum, a member of the Monmouth community, has passed away. So he had decided not to continue with us this year, and we lost him about a month ago. I just want to pass on my condolences to his family, and we were really fortunate to have him. He was a former educator, principal, special ed director, and brought a lot of knowledge and talent to our committee and to our community. So to the Flum family, thank you for letting him spend time with us, and we wish you well. Also tonight, on a happier note, it is Jennifer Kabista's birthday. So, and I'm still employed here, even though I scheduled this budget meeting for her birthday. So I appreciate that. So if we want to lead the flag, go ahead, Aurelia, why don't you do roll call? We'll see. It looks like people have checked in.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Richard?
Yes, it's Richard. I'm here hunkered down at home over at the airport.
Welcome. Tom?
Here.
Michael?
Yeah, this is Mike Gearman. I'm here.
Rachel?
She's here in the room with us.
Okay. And Mary? Mary Schellenbarger?
Mary is excused.
Okay.
And then the board members as well.
Okay. Vidal? Peggy?
Here.
Steve?
Yes, I'm here.
Jerry?
Here.
Jan?
Jan is excused.
Jan is excused.
Don?
Here.
Darcy?
Okay.
Okay.
We can review those, I guess, those questions. I can find those questions.
Pardon me? I'm not sure. Somebody's... Okay.
That's it.
All right. So Jen, do you want to lead the flag
Flag salute? Yep. We could... I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That may be the first time I've ever led the pledge of allegiance or flag salute in the in this role. Right. So thank you for that.
So, the presiding officer.
So we do need to, before we begin, appoint a presiding officer to the budget committee. So as part of this process, I would take a nomination from either a committee member or a board member of someone to preside over these committee meetings over the next few, really a couple weeks here. So I will open up for nomination. Jerry.
I nominate Mike Neerman.
So Jerry
Hi,
has...
this is Steve. I'll nominate Mike Neerman to preside as our chair of the budget committee.
Good, thanks, Steve. I accept, but Could I get a pass for tonight? Because I'm not really set up to chair tonight.
Sure, first let's get I think we heard a second because Jerry also nominated Mike, so we have a second if there is a vote. Unless there are any other nominations, let's check on that first. Any other nominations? I know none of you jumped up to do it, so, okay. All right. Why don't you ask for the vote?
So could I could we ask for the vote, please? Aurelia, would you,
No, just all in favor.
all in favor? Sorry, I've got,
That's
I
okay.
think Vidal's trying to jump on here, so.
I'll get that, Jen.
Okay, thank you,
I'll
Steve.
get that for Vidal.
I appreciate that. So all those in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any nays? All right. Representative Neerman, you are our Budget Committee Chair for this year,
Thank
the
you.
2020 school year.
Thanks. I was hoping to kick the can down the road till the next meeting. I guess I could do it, but I wasn't really prepared to do it.
That's okay. I'll go ahead and we can just kind of move through the agenda, and that way you and I'll have a chance to connect before the next meeting to be able to
Good,
do
and
it.
I'll be happy to delegate the chairmanship to you, Cease, for the purpose of this meeting. So
No, you can't really do that, but since tonight we actually is mostly for informational purposes, we'll just say Jen and I will host the meeting rather than
Good,
chair
thank you.
it at this point.
thank you. Proceed.
So as we start this, I just wanted to, as we begin this process, just go through a little bit of where we started and where we're going. Obviously, today is a very unique day, and we're going to share because a lot of potential changes will be happening in the next few days. But just want to ground ourselves as we begin this work. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here to just go through just reminders of our strategic plan and where we started. So if we could pull that PowerPoint up for me. Just give us a second here.
Let's hear. That's it, so.
No, go back one, Cease. We're still showing us live, so in a minute here.
We do see it.
You do see it?
On our-
Perfect.
on our end.
All right, awesome.
Great.
So a couple things that we just wanted to start with is our strategic goals. Again, these were established in the fall of 1819, and so I'm just going to quickly go through them as a reminder. Again, this was started with, obviously with our staff and our students, and then as we get into more of the objectives and the accountability measures that I'm going to share as we begin this process, really has been that collaborative over the last 18 months as we have built our continuous improvement and strategic plan. And so that is really where we're going to ground our work as we go through this budget process, because this has been amazing conversations with our community and students and staff to build this plan moving forward. Obviously, this last 2 months have had a little bit of a different approach, but as we get into the budget, we really need to ground ourselves in these areas. So the first goal is focused on student growth and achievement. The second goal is focused on our family involvement, and I couldn't say that enough right now in the world that we are in, where we are partnering with our families as we do distance learning together, and what that looks like. And that has been amazing learning by both our staff, students, and our community and our families. So we're greatly appreciative for that. And again, how do we continue to foster those relationships together? Because we know that you are actively involved right now in the learning of your students. So again, that's our second goal. The third goal is focused on our community partnership. Again, how do we collaborate to cultivate student success? Again, I use this as an example, the platform that we are using to even have the budget meeting, to be able to stream it live, I'm sure there's more people that probably have watched our live board meetings and budget meetings than probably in the years past. And so just has given us that avenue to continue those partnerships and how we do this work together in supporting students and our community. And then last but not least is our staff leadership and continuous improvement, that we make student-centered decisions, make those decision makings through professional development, focused on continuous improvement and growth. And I can say, again, as I shared at the last board meeting, just the professional learning that our staff has done. We have built distance learning and continue to learn and gather feedback with that piece of it. So we're going to ground ourselves in those 4 goals as we look at our budget moving forward. The next slide talks more specifically about when we went out to do our chats, really identifying areas where we are going to focus and what needs to be our focus. So these are what I call our 10 objectives. I think that a couple things in here too, I just want to share out. You can see the third and fourth item on the table down, decision-making process with an equity lens. To ensure supportive learning environments. You know, equity is at the core, that our job is to educate all students within the Central School District, and we want to make sure that we are looking at all lenses and all areas that support our students. And so that's very important in this process. And again, that relationship, that's two-way communication. So those are really 2 areas that we're going to continue to ground ourselves in and make sure that that is at the forefront. The rest of the 8 objectives are more intentional and identified through our continuous improvement process and chats that we did the last really year since we've been doing that. So one of the things I want to be clear on is obviously we are, and could I just ask a favor, somebody, if you could make sure everybody is on mute? I would greatly appreciate that.
That also, it helps not only the lack of interference, but it focuses more on the mics, and so everyone can hear the speaker better. So please check that you're on mute. Vidal just raised his hand. He has a question.
We'll get to you, Vidal, just here in a second.
I don't have a question. I was just trying to make sure that everybody knows here.
Okay,
Hi, Vidal, welcome.
thanks.
Obviously, we have changes going on within the learning environments that we currently have. But again, I know the goal is that as we work through this next year is to get back to having safe learning environments within our school. We know that, as I've shared before, that's going to be a process that may take time. But the other 8 are the areas that we really want to focus in as we look at budget. Obviously, we know today we're going to share some information with all of you of potentially what is to come, but we have built our budget based off of the $9 billion that was expected when we started this process. So again, here you can see just the key areas that the community, our staff, and students really are wanting us to focus on as we move forward. Again, we're going to have lots of conversations about this, but again, this is part of the work that's grounded. I want to make a note that I think right now that second line on this table, mental health supports and social emotional learning, that has been a big focus since we have started with the pandemic, and we continue to focus on that, making sure that students have those connections with their other students in Google Meets and their Google Classroom processes. So again, we're learning and growing through this process, but wanted to point that out as well within our strategies of really focusing on the budget. And then the next slide is just how we are going to measure ourselves. I mean, obviously right now, when we talk about absenteeism, attendance looks a little bit different for us right now. But we know once we get back to in the classrooms or whatever that may look like, that these are going to be our accountability focus areas. Several of them are already in the state report card. We are also in the process of developing a robust data warehouse, or data dashboards as I like to call them, that will be publicly available to view by anyone, community members, family members, staff, and students. So that's as you can see, that in development, that's still a part of our process that we're working through right now. So again, I bring this up because although these last 2 months have been very different in our world, especially in the public education, this is our focus, and we will continue to strive to get back to these paths as we work through what's ahead of us in the next few months. So just want to pause there, and if there are any questions from any budget committee members or board members, I would open that up as we start here before I hand it back over to Cease.
All right. I just wanted to give you a brief look at our year-to-date budget for the current year, 1920. In the packet, that is a 2-page document that has colored columns. It shows actual budgets and expenditures for the last several years. The yellow columns on the right are the current year, and hopefully you got an updated one of those. The first one I sent out, not all the columns printed. This is as of April 30th, and this is a report that the budget, that the board reviews quarterly to take care, to look at our financial situation. This is only the general fund, which is the largest portion of all of our funds, and it indicates the revenue as well as the expenditures that we are in. Oops, sorry. I have a couple slides coming up where we'll explain a little bit about how we are adjusting this budget for these final couple of months. Obviously, there are some things that will be under budget and other things that where potentially our expenditures are increasing. But as of this time, we anticipate being at about 80% of our revenue, or a little bit over that, and we are over that. We are at 92% of our revenue, so we've had some extra revenue come in. And then we anticipate being at about 80% of our budgeted expenditures, and that is right where we are at. But again, within those categories, things will change, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the actual budget for the coming year. And so, are there any questions about that? Seeing none, we will begin the process as we're required to do by having our superintendent deliver this year's budget message. That written document is the first couple of pages in the budget.
I'm sorry, I did have a question. I just couldn't figure out how to
Okay,
follow the different things.
sure, Vidal.
Sorry. So when I'm looking at the yellow section, like as you said, the budgeted and actual,
Uh-huh.
there is service from other districts, and it said budget is 5,000, and then there's nothing there.
Right.
So is that money that we get back, or?
Right, you're
Yeah.
looking on the revenue page, revenue item number 1941, near the bottom of the first section. That would be any services we would provide another district that they pay us for. And we don't have any of those currently, other than transportation, and those are coded up above in the transportation section. But we budget a little bit for it. Occasionally, we'll have a district need some services for it from us.
Yeah, so I'm looking at that Fund 100 budget to actual.
Yes,
Is that,
Yep.
am I correct?
yes,
Okay, so then there's one more down on R3103, Common School Fund. No, it's the one that under that, R31XX.
right,
There's 650,000 and there's nothing actual on that.
yes. That is a grant that we get every year in May. So as of April 30th, it had not been granted, but that is an adjustment that the Oregon Department of Revenue makes, or Oregon Department of Education makes for us on our high-cost disability students. And so we don't ever anticipate seeing that until May.
Oh, okay. So that's not money in the bank, as we say.
It's not, because I'll actually let you know it came in a little bit less than we had anticipated.
Okay. That was my only question. Thank you.
Yep, you'll see that at the end of May.
Okay.
Good question, though. It is a big chunk. All right, so no other questions. Then again, if you go to your 2021 proposed budget, the first couple of pages are the budget message, and Jen does read that into the record.
So here we go. So dear community members, a year ago at this time, we, as a district, were in the midst of developing our multi-year strategic plan to support Central School District 13J students, staff, families, and communities. We listened to many voices and developed 4 goals leading to a vision of student success: student growth and achievement, family involvement, community partnership, and staff leadership and continuous improvement. We felt confident and excited as the Oregon State Legislature made the largest investment it has ever appropriated for K-12 education at $9 billion for the 2019-2021 biennium. The Joint Committee on Student Success released their proposal for new investments and accountability in Oregon's K-12 systems. That funding would provide Central with an additional $2.4 million a year starting in 2020 to focus on closing historic achievement gaps for its most vulnerable students. We used some one-time money to get a jump start on the new student investment account programming, focused primarily on the number 1 needed identified in our strategic plan: student health and safety. We contracted for additional services with our mental health providers of Polk County and school resource officers, and we started limited hiring to transform districts' practices in social and emotional learning. The 18 months of collaboration, staff meetings, community superintendent chats, and board retreats was filled with robust conversations and whispers of hope for all of our students. We had started to build a budget to fulfill the promise of behavioral supports focused on tiered interventions, mental health supports and social emotional learning, alignment of K-12 Common Core standards, assessment, programming, and instructional frameworks, programming focused on CTE, which stands for Career Technical Education, increased electives, arts, PE, physical education, extracurricular, and expanded learning opportunities, exploration of class size and the conditions and capacities of our buildings, developing a family involvement plan, developing a community partnership plan, decision-making processes with an equity lens, and relationships through open two-way communication and collaboration. At this writing, the economic fallout from the measures taken to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus, which causes COVID-19, is taking a significant toll and impact on the ability of our state to fund its announced priorities. We are still working toward the objectives in the strategic plan. However, the current situation in the state of Oregon is causing us to pause and refocus on basics. A school district budget is a statement of both the values of the organization and that of the community. Along with the reminder of those values, please note the following requirements as set forth in ORS Chapter 294, that we explain the budget document, the financial policies, important aspects of the budget in connection with policies, the reason for changes in appropriation and revenue, and note major changes in financial policy and accounting basis. We will continue to focus on the whole child, where students are healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally. We will continue to review, align, and develop systems, practices, and programs to support our educational learning environments. We will center our work in equity always. Negotiations with both of our bargaining units, the Central Education Association, which is our licensed staff, and the Oregon School Employee Association, which is our classified staff, are currently paused based on the unknowns of our revenue. We, the school board, administration, and union leadership, are collaboratively looking at all the possibilities, knowing that this could all change when the state releases an updated budget forecast on May 20th. As we are still just weeks into a new world of virtual teaching and learning, with a reliance on flexibility and technology and dedication to physical distancing and sanitation and hygiene, we anticipate those things continuing into the next budget year. There have been no change to the district's accounting basis and no major changes to financial policies. 2 days after this budget message is delivered, we will begin to see the true picture of what is expected in state school funding for for the 2020-21 school year. This budget reflects adjustments to revenue and expenditures based on the district's strategic plan assumptions. It is likely the second budget meeting will include many adjustments, and even more likely that the board will be making adjustments even after budget is adopted. However, I know the board, staff, parents, and students and community of Central School District will continue to work together to get through these unprecedented times. Respectfully submitted, Jennifer Cabista, Superintendent.
Thank you. So, in reviewing the budget document, there are several sections to this, including a budget summary, which really goes into detail about the assumptions that were made and talks, so I kind of want to go through those because, again, everything's in flux. So we need to let you know where we started with this budget and what you are looking at. I want to go through the budget process and how things will move from here, as we say. We are in unprecedented times, and we will have a very different budget process than we have had at any time in the last 20 years almost. So the budget before you has been prepared based on the estimates we were given for the 2021 school year. Those were issued by the Oregon Department of Education on February 25th. That is the typical time in which they collect all of the projections from various school districts, and they then determine where they think that the allotted money is going to go and how it will be allocated. So we have those numbers. We don't have any other way to assume what's going to happen with the budget, and this budget was being prepared based on that number. Also, the governor has asked state agencies and programs to prepare a cut of 8.5% to their biennial budgets. You may have heard that number. You may have also heard a 17% cut, and that is because the biennial budget covers 2 years' worth of spending. One of those years is almost over, and therefore, in order to take the dollars out of a 2-year budget and cut it in 1 year, it basically amounts to almost a 17% reduction. The state school fund is the largest single line item in the state budget, and it is its own line item. It would also be subject to cuts. The governor doesn't have the ability to choose to have some programs take a harder hit and other programs be spared. Her only budgetary authority is across-the-board cuts. Therefore, pending any legislative action, a flat cut of 17% would be a total reduction of $655.6 million to the state school fund. And in a moment, I'll tell you how that translates for our district. But again, tomorrow, on Wednesday, the state Office of Economic Analysis will issue an economic forecast. It's going to be a prediction or a projection too. Nobody really knows what the true effect of this is, but they will have to give numbers that the governor and the legislature will use to make actual decisions about the 1920-21 funding. In addition to the money that's there, Oregon has received $109 million in federal funds to assist schools specifically. That will be allocated based on the Title I enrollment of every district in the state. This program is known as ESSER, so we'll be talking about that again. That's the Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Fund. But we don't yet know how much our portion of that is. That will help us to be able to replace some of the services we would otherwise cut. Then, when the legislature meets, they could determine if or how they would use the state's Education Stabilization Fund. That is a rainy day fund that the state has been building up for times just such of these. That money could be used to rebalance the state's budget to backfill any cuts. However, that money is used, it's gone. So if it's all appropriated into the coming year, we wouldn't have any for future years. And that's going to be quite a topic of discussion, I believe, with the legislature. When that happens, when the legislature meets and determines what these revenue projections should look like and how to allocate that scarcer revenue across all state agencies, it is likely to be too late to meet the required June 30th budget adoption deadline. So all public entities must adopt their budgets by June 30th. And if the district based its budget on those full cuts, since we won't know likely what's going to happen, and then we ended up with additional revenue, that would require a significant supplemental budget. So by budgeting at a known amount, the district has more flexibility to make cuts when revenue allocations are finalized. That way, the board can determine, once we know actual revenue, how to better allocate those cuts across our budget. If we try to make that decision now and then find out that the revenue picture is very different, it would just be a more difficult technical move to correct the budget later on.
Steve, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you're talking about cuts, where are we directing those cuts at?
Well, so where the cuts are directed is a decision of this budget committee and or the board. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about the end of this. We're not suggesting that we talk about cuts tonight because until we get that revenue forecast on Wednesday, the minute that comes out, there will be plenty of experts trying to determine what that means. And we would have a much better idea. And we do plan to have more information to present to you at the June Budget Committee meeting. We think we'll have a better idea then. But we'll ask you tonight for some guidance once we get through this.
Are you our expert?
No experts. There are no experts in this room.
Vidal, let me jump into that. I think that this is going to be because of what we are working through in unprecedented times. This is going to be a collaborative conversation amongst the leadership of the administration, the leadership of the board, the leadership of the unions, the leadership within the budget committee as we maneuver through that. And again, as he said, those are some of the questions that we have started to do if-thens. And I think that once we get through Wednesday, can start and really have an understanding of what that might look like, then be able to start giving that information and then be prepared at the June meeting to give you really that robust look. So know that there's lots of conversations going on. I just, right before this meeting, I had a meet and confer with our Central Education Association and just talking through a few things that we're working through. Obviously the budget was part of that conversation, but again, it's that collective approach that we're going to do to get through this as we work through it this year.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve,
Yes.
this is Don. This is Don.
Yes, Tom.
Quick question on I can't remember the exact number now since the slide was a couple back, but the $660-some million reduction in state funding, assuming a 17% cut, does that include the Student Improvement Act?
The Student Investment Act, or the whole thing, which was the Student Success Act, is a completely different funding source.
Yeah.
So in addition to a cut, that revenue hasn't even been collected yet. And in fact, based on the current situation, the Oregon Department of Revenue actually extended companies' time to make their estimated payments. So we knew we weren't even going to be collecting that revenue until October. Now we aren't even collecting the estimated revenue until, I believe, June. And everyone anticipates that revenue will be significantly reduced. So we, again, based on the information that comes out Wednesday, our lobbyists, our business officials group, we are basically suggesting that that money could be cut entirely to districts.
Right. Okay. So basically, we would see that go away, and then we would see whatever our portion of $660 million would be disappear.
The $655.6 million is literally just the state school fund. It does not cover all the other funding that we get. For example, the state has another fund that subsidizes free and reduced lunch. So that is a separate program and could, again, potentially have its own funding hit. So there are a lot of other programs like that. Right. Measure 98, the high school success program, is its own line item. It also we are preparing for a 17% cut to that, up to a 17% cut. So those things could all potentially be reduced in addition to this 6.6 million.
I have a couple.
So one other more philosophical question: if the legislature decides not to call this a rainy day, what would they call a rainy day?
Perhaps our budget committee chairman has some input on that rather than.
I think this qualifies, at least in my opinion, as a rainy day. I don't think you need to get nuclear weapons involved or anything like that, but I believe this does qualify as a rainy day. I will let the other 59 members of the House know that you said that, Don.
Hey, Cease, I had a question. This is Steve.
Sure, Steve.
Can you go back to the previous slide and explain again the last bullet?
About the current year? No.
Not that slide. Now go forward. Sorry. This one. So budgeting at the previously known amount will allow districts. So are you suggesting that we approve a budget at the end of June that's equivalent to our prior year budget? Because we are required to do so by law?
No.
And then through the summer months, monitor how this plays out and basically start to make cuts and decisions after the budget has been approved?
You're not required to choose to budget at this full amount. And this is based on the revenue that had been previously appropriated for this coming fiscal year based on the revenue projections and the allocations we received in February. You don't have to do that at all. If the budget committee has guidance and can come to some kind of consensus about what numbers you would like us to use, and where we would make cuts to get those, we could make those decisions at the June 1st meeting, right? We
So,
can
but
start making
when
those
you-
decisions at any
When you
time.
wrote when you wrote this bullet, what were you thinking? That we should budget at the previously known amount? Because that's how I read it.
If you budgeted the previously known amount, if we budgeted the full amount, if we know something for sure before that, obviously it would make sense to budget for sure. But remember, when we make the allocations or and you do the appropriations, we make them not only in total dollar amounts, but we divide them out between things like instruction versus support services. So once you make those appropriations, we would, and at a smaller amount, if we say, let's just take the 17% cut now, let's call it worst case, move forward, and if we get more revenue, then we can add back. We can certainly do that. There is nothing in the process that wouldn't allow you to do that. It's just requires sort of more technical work later on.
Can you do it the other way? Can we approve the budget at the previous amount and then just use the allocation process to actually allocate whatever revenue we believe we'll actually receive?
Yes, we can. You can go ahead and we can approve the budget at this amount, and then as actual revenue comes in, even though you've appropriated, if we don't have the revenue, we can't spend it. So that's one stopper on the process. The other thing we could do is change the appropriations to a lower amount. So as we go through the process, and maybe say the legislature doesn't complete its work even by June, and the board can't adopt a budget with new known numbers, and it's July, and finally all the rinsing and squeezing and everything is all done on a budget, and we receive a new projection from the Oregon Department of Education. At that point, if we had budgeted the full amount, we could still come back and reduce those appropriations to make sure that our budget actually reflected the intended revenue.
Okay. So said differently, by the end of June, we may need to pass a budget, and likely will, where we don't completely understand the revenue picture, and therefore we will not necessarily understand exactly what cuts we would make.
Yeah.
Although if there's something crystal clear, we would try to do that between now and the end of June.
I think that's right on, Steve. That's exactly what, again, today, as we said, that we're starting that formality process. We know that on Wednesday, there is going to be new information, knowing that that's going to help us at least start those what I'm going to say, clearer, hopefully, spaces where we may need to go. But again, also knowing that there still may need to be some adjustments after that, depending on what takes place with the state. So, yeah, I mean, that's our goal.
It's
Even under
hard.
COVID, this isn't new and different. I mean, we almost have to do this every other year because the legislature's in session and they often don't pass the school budget until after June. So this isn't anything new.
Yeah, that's true. Typically, however, by the second year, we kind of know where we're going, and this is usually kind of a much more easy process. In fact,
So we're practiced up from the odd numbered years. So
Yes.
we're good at it now.
That's a good point.
yes, that is absolutely true. Tom, did you have a question?
So,
So,
comment
please-
and question. The
Sorry, go
question is
ahead.
easy. The accounting basis is mentioned in the budget presentation twice. What is the accounting basis?
We are on a modified cash basis,
Modified cash, not
Right.
modified accrual?
not modified accrual. We are on basically a cash basis.
Okay. All right, thank you. So that hasn't changed?
That has not
For the
changed.
last 150 years?
Right.
Okay. Thank you for that. The second comment is that the economists have done the best they can with the information they had, but I would also suggest that they are in uncharted territory. They look at all kinds of stuff. So we're using the 17%, but that may not be end up being the number. It could be lower.
Yes.
So everybody should keep that in mind. The effect of a 17% cut is going to most affect people out there who think their jobs are at risk. And, their stomachs are tightening right now, I'm sure a lot of them. So we should be very careful how we address this so that we reduce their anxiety and their stress to the least amount possible.
And Tom, I appreciate that because it's since I have been here, it's very important to me that when I talk leadership is staff, leadership is students, leadership is community, it's our committees. So I'm appreciative of that because that is the work, because I think about them greatly as we go through these processes. It's not fun to have these conversations because you are talking about people's lives.
Yes.
So I appreciate that because that's core to our value and how we, or at least since I've been here, that's core to our value and what we do and how we make decisions.
So the one question that I had was, the way it sounds that we're not budgeted to staff the way we are not this year, but like in 2019, we're not ready to pay all of our teachers and classified staff and everybody else this coming fall.
So right now, the budget that is in front of you assumes we would be fully funded, and at full funding, we are able to keep everybody that we have. That is not a concern for us.
So we're going to start fall 2020 with everybody.
Well, depending on the...
Or is that we're all dependent on this thing on Wednesday?
Correct. Yeah. Well, it depends on the thing on Wednesday, but also then again, the legislature can, as Tom said, not only do that those cuts might be more or less, the legislature may choose to come in and use this rainy day fund. There are lots of other options. So that's why if we knew it was going to be some percentage of cut, we would certainly move forward and give you the options. And I think a little bit later in here, I actually sort of talk through some of the things, generally speaking, that we think we could save on before we started looking at any positions. So I'll get to that for you.
Okay.
So any more questions just about this process? Okay, so again, just the current year to date, and again, we do have one more state school fund payment. The look-backs is what Vidal was talking about, which is the special grant to cover our high-cost disability students, and then also an adjustment on our state school fund. Those were both negative. We have some more property tax coming in, so we have more revenue coming in. And the important thing about this is we are really looking at how much we will be able to carry over into next year. That is going to be a huge factor for us. The carryover that we had budgeted actually shows as an expense. It's not expensed yet, but it is kept in those contingencies that are at the bottom of the second page. And basically what we thought we would end up with is at about $3.1 million. So that's what we had hoped to end this year with, to be able to have that money and be able to carry it forward. Everything we can do to maximize that, the more revenue we get in this year, the less expenses we have this year, the better off we are, because then hopefully we'll have more money to carry forward next year to be able to start off with and spend. It's one-time money, and we always take that into account. So let me talk to you a little bit about where some of those savings could be between now and the end of June, not very far from now. For example, we contract out for substitutes. Our substitute teachers and all of our substitute classified folks are hired through a company called EduStaff. While we don't have any liability for pay, benefits, or unemployment costs for those people. So clearly, not using subs since the week before spring break we will have some savings there. Our professional development training and travel costs, spring is often a busy time for folks to do training. All of that shut down. So we have not done any of that this spring.
Cease, can I just make a comment to
Yes.
that? I want to be clear about this. We are doing professional development. Since we have
Right.
shifted to distance learning, we have built an online platform, so our staff is still getting professional learning. Normally, though, we have a combination of they're going to conferences in state, they're going to conferences out of state. So as Cease says, that our what I'm going to say, the normal professional learning that we have built in this school district that money is being saved because we are doing it in a different platform right now.
Yeah, thank you. Other savings include utility costs, and I didn't write it down here, but we've saved a heck of a lot of money on toilet paper for the last couple of months at the school district. I just could probably tell you how much that is, but we've saved a lot of that. And then other money that's been saved is student activities, athletics. Spring is a crazy time for field trips. However, most of that comes from fundraising. So that's not helping this general fund balance, but it is something where those monies are not being expended. However, to offset that, we do have some extra expenses due to the shutdown. We have been, even though most of our learning has gone purely online, we have continued to print and mail student packets. And Jen, do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, again, I think that's part of this process that we're continuing to do. There are families that are wanting the paper packet option instead of the virtual. So we are, like I said from the beginning as we started this, we're going to meet families where they're at and in supporting their students through that process. So buildings are still K through 12, building the lessons not only virtually, but also in the packet form and then sending them off to families. So again, when we started, we really did about 2 weeks, full weeks of packets to everybody and then started to dwindle that down. But that is still part of our process and will continue as we stay in this platform. So that will continue through the end of the school year.
Yeah, and I have a comment on that. As far as the packets go,
Okay.
I don't think that the packet. I mean, I haven't seen this week's packet, but listening to what my son is doing online with his classroom, his virtual classroom, it seems a lot more in depth than what the packet does. And I don't know if it's just his classroom or if she's basing it.
Vidal, I want to make sure I hear you correctly. You're saying that the virtual classroom is more depth than the packet? Am I hearing you correctly?
That is what I'm seeing.
Okay.
And my son enjoys more. I don't know if it's just that he loves the interaction with other students and his teacher.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that is. But when I look at the packet and then what's in it compared to what he's learning online, it's more in depth.
Yeah.
It's very,
It probably will be, Vidal, because there is that interaction and that connection. Like I said, we're continuing to work with families because we would like everyone to go in that direction. We also know that there are, as Cece is going to talk a little bit about technology, there are still some technology gaps that we're working through. I'm still waiting for some equipment to come that we ordered right as this started so we could get more hotspots up and going throughout our community. So I think hopefully as we continue down that process of, again, like I've said, we're probably going to need it through the rest of this year into summer and then as we go into next year. So I'm hoping that we can continue to do that. There's some other things that we're working on with some partnerships as well to see if we can continue to help families in that way. So I appreciate that feedback.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Yes, and that's true. I mean, we obviously have increased our expenditures on technology. Having the Chromebooks out to families, we did a survey. We asked families what their needs were, and we brought every Chromebook in from every building in the district because that is the platform that we use. And we had a team of people sanitizing those, wiping off programs that have been added, resetting student information, and then redeploying those Chromebooks. So increasing those kinds of things has also increased the software licensing expense, right? We bought more Chromebooks. We have to buy the licenses for them. There are licenses for Zoom meetings. There are licenses for Google Classroom add-ons. There are licenses for other software, so those have increased. We have a lot of people working from home, and so sometimes that required getting them equipment. They used equipment in their office or classroom. They didn't have anything at home, so we've done some of that. And then the internet, as Jen mentioned, we have some mobile hotspots that we were able to procure, and they are inside school buses. And as of today, there is a bus in the parking lot of every one of our buildings, including the Henry Hill building, and taped on the window of the bus are directions about how to use your district-issued device to be able to get on the internet and sit in a car and do homework.
Or work in general. And I think one of the things I'm going to say, like I said, we're waiting for a few more pieces of equipment. Our goal is to try and have all of the 6 sites, the 5 schools and Henry Hill, as locations for where people can come and do that. Then with the new equipment that's coming, now we can move those buses into other spaces because we do have, because of our transportation software, we can locate handfuls of areas where we could put a bus throughout the day that would allow kids in their homes to get that service. So like I said, it's my small frustration. My team is doing amazing things. I think everyone across the country is dealing with the technology issue. So once we have that equipment up, then we'll be able to really expand that further into other parts of the community where internet is needed.
Yeah, we also have the ability, again, through partnerships, if we have some need out in rural areas, we have identified a couple of spots, including our Polk County Fire District has some rural fire stations that aren't used. They are volunteer staffed, and so if we have families in an area near those fire stations, we'll be able to bring kids in to those areas and put Wi-Fi in those, for example, if needed. We haven't identified that need yet, but we are working diligently to make sure that our students have the best access we can provide, because the biggest learning from all of this is the digital divide. The students and families who have access to this technology and those who don't. So we are working through that. A couple other smaller costs are safety, sanitation, hygiene costs. For example, we rented, smartly apparently, we jumped out and quickly rented hand washing stations from a porta potty company. So the little hand washing pieces that they provide, we apparently got the last 6 of those available in the valley, so they are in our buildings now. And all of those kinds of things, plus the additional protective equipment. Today we received a shipment of infrared thermometers that we'll be able to use as we bring staff or students back in and need to do health checks. We actually have opened a claim with FEMA. FEMA has some additional funds for those kinds of specific things, and we will be submitting for reimbursement for those kinds of things. And then the last extra expense is communications. We realizing very quickly that we really need to over-communicate and be overly responsive, and that's difficult to do, especially when many of our staff from the district office are working from home, many of our staff in buildings are working from home, and so we have had to invest in some of that as well. So that's a little bit of where our picture is for this year and kind of how we're moving everything and all these levers that we can to maximize our revenue this year, minimize our expense this year, and have that little extra cushion to push us into next year. So what would these cuts mean to Central? And again, there's backfilling to be done, but we have calculated that we would expect to see about $272,000 less for every $100 million cut to the state school fund. So anything that is not backfilled by the federal funds, either state reserves or legislative reallocation, that $655 million would mean about a $1.78 million cut to us. And again, we know this makes folks nervous, but we're not there yet, and we have some ways to reduce other expenses. But obviously, our largest expense is personnel. Our only product is knowledge transfer and support services. And the cost of a teacher is approximately $100,000 a year. The salary cost, for example, if we had furlough days or we reduced actual student contact days, if we have all employees off work, that is also about $100,000. So those are two ways in which we would measure those cuts. After we first look at everything else, our priority clearly is keeping the people we have. We can't serve students without them. We already had situations where our class loads and our case loads for special services were at a stretching or breaking point. And if all those students come back and need additional services, either because they got some lags academically or because families are going through a lot of trauma right now, and we have to help those kids.
The other piece is I think, and I want to be clear about this, and I keep saying this, and it's because what we think school's going to look like in the fall, it's going to still look different. And I'm going to keep saying that. I don't know what that looks like. We're starting to get some guidance on how to bring people in. But as I've said, and I'll continue to say it to the community, and I will continue to convey to our staff and the board, the safety and security of our students and our staff is the #1 priority. So again, that is part of that conversation that we can't lose sight of as we have these conversations.
Yeah. And then Chair Love asked about the student investment account. As part of that, as we had gone through that very intensive planning process, and again, that took a lot of input from our staff, our students, the community, our administrators, and our student investment account plan included some about $800,000 that we were going to move out of the general fund to the student investment account. And that was because in the spring of 2019, we ended up with a lot of one-time funds. We had a couple of good look-backs from the state. And so the budget committee and the board at the sort of at the last minute last year, when that became apparent, chose to invest that money in things that would qualify under the Student Investment Act. And between actual hiring and then contracted services, we increased our general fund budget by about $800,000 a year, with the intention to move that out of the general fund to the student investment account. If the student investment account money isn't there, that's another issue that we have, sort of another potential gap in our general fund budget that we will need to deal with. On top of that, the district had planned to spend an additional $1.8 million a year on salaries, contracted services, and training. That was this brand new investment that was going to be made. And we have done none of that hiring. We hadn't advertised those positions. And so those actually hadn't been implemented. It's just the lost opportunities for that. So any questions just about those numbers?
And again, I just want to be clear, and C said it, but I'm going to make it clear again. These are just showing you the amounts, not that that's the direction that we're going, just the amounts of what a furlough day looks like, their cost, and then what staff costs would be. So I just want to make that clear as we go through this process.
So what this budget assumes, again, based on the full funding that we have as the only known number we have, it included no cuts to staffing. We even kept vacant positions in this budget. So that's just so you know, those are included here. And no cuts in budgeted services. We did the roll-up, which in personnel terms is all of our folks have some opportunities for either increase due to longevity with the district or increase in experience. And those were included in the new budget numbers. So that sort of base salary that we paid, even if we keep the exact same people and we don't give them any kind of cost of living increase, they get more money the next year. That is included in here. Those are all negotiable items that could happen if we end up facing a situation. We can determine the cost of those so that we could say, you know, if we could save 2 or 3 jobs by holding that back, for example. Those are common negotiations I think folks do. We're not anywhere near that yet. But that is included in here. But there are no cost of living increases and no increase to our insurance caps. So just so you know, those personnel numbers, what that constitutes. In this budget, we have allocated money into the student investment account just as a placeholder. Again, there's no specific positions, there's no programs, we've done no hiring. But that money was placed in the budget as a placeholder at the time we were preparing this. We thought that would exist. So what kinds of priorities would we have you look at? And just to let you know, again, to preserve as much of the net revenue we have this year, we have instituted a hiring freeze. So any of those vacancies that are included in next year's budget are not being filled right now. We had a couple of teachers who had known resignations, and those positions were filled before any of this happened, but everything else is on hold, trying to preserve the money for next year. We have the savings we talked about from professional development, but also we have a lot of extra hours that our staff spends. Sometimes they work into June on building systems, on working through district-wide issues. All of that is on hold, and again, the training and travel. So the hiring of substitutes for that, all of that will be savings from this next month and a half. And then going into next year, because there's a lot of money budgeted for that. So if we choose to cut back on that next year, or for example, travel is reduced, training continues to be virtual instead of in person, those would be savings next year. We rolled all that in, but that could be an initial place to cut for next year. We could reduce our general fund support of enrichment and co-curricular activities. We have a federal grant for our after-school program, for example. Currently, we support that with some general fund money to make it a little more robust, but there are opportunities there to streamline our delivery and or to cut back so that that federal grant would support those activities, and we could reduce the general fund support for those. And really, I think as the board has made clear, that maintaining our priorities from the strategic planning process, and that was a lot of work. Y'all spent a lot of time on that. And those priorities so deeply reflect what we heard from the community, from our staff, from students, that maintaining the health and safety and focusing on improved academic achievement for all populations, our equity values, those things will be priorities. We will, at all costs, try to keep those in our budget. So any questions about those, what that might look like? So, here are some of the challenges we will face, though, as we move forward and in this brave new world. Protocols for increased sanitation, hygiene, needs for PPE, those will continue. We absolutely anticipate those continuing through any summer school we deliver, any school we open next fall. So we are going to have to find ways to pay for those things as well. Our challenges include staffing. We have some staff who are of an age or of the type of health issues that are considered risk factors, and we could face some difficult challenges in keeping our staff working once we have exposure to students again. I was on the phone call with the district last week, and they only have 2 bus drivers who do not have limiting health issues. So I don't know how they're going to operate. We will be faced, we believe, with logistics of smaller classrooms, that we will have, especially current guidance would indicate, no more than 10 students in a class. Well, we don't have enough buildings for that, clearly. We also don't have enough staff for that if they all come at the same time. So how you work those schedules and how you get students in smaller classrooms, we would anticipate no group activities. Distancing on school buses will be a challenge. Right now, if you have to keep kids 6 feet apart unless they're in the same family, that's about 11 kids on a 77-passenger bus. And I know at least one of my board members or budget committee members here lives out in the country, and she knows how many kids are on those buses. We have a lot of students on buses. How we will transport them all in and get them there at 8 o'clock in the morning, those are great challenges our team is working on. We have changes to food service, and I haven't really talked about that. You know, food service is its own budget. That is almost entirely federally funded through the USDA. We have been serving almost 1,000 kids a day 2 meals. They get a sack breakfast and a sack lunch. And those 1,000 meals a day are being prepared in our kitchens. We have staff handing them out at our buildings, and we have buses driving around outside the city limits to get students food. We expect those kinds of things to continue. Luckily, we have received a waiver to continue that model through summer. When we fed kids for free in the summer, we used to feed about 30 kids a day, and now we're feeding 1,000. So we anticipate, luckily we received from some federal waivers to do that. But that food service staff has not had a day off. They didn't, everybody else had the week before spring break to kind of digest and spring break to kind of figure out what was coming next. That staff has not had a day off. They have worked Monday through Friday since this happened.
And there's handfuls of staff across the district that have, since this has happened, have not taken a day off. So again, there are a lot of mitigating pieces with that, because I do think at some point, some of my staff need to, they deserve a break. I mean, they have been working really hard, and I don't, I say that because I think that that's an important piece of fatigue and making good decisions, right? We are making quality decisions right now. I know some people may disagree with some of that. We know that we're trying to meet every family in every space. But I also know that there, at times, as C says, that fatigue factor can fill in. And so we're trying to work through those as well as we work through this budget process also, right? So if we cut staff, that means less staff to do more work.
And we also anticipate this dual track model. For some families, for some students, distance learning is probably working better. I keep talking about the high school kids who are probably doing all their homework between like noon and 1 o'clock in the morning, because that's when they would rather do it. So we anticipate investments will continue in maintaining distance learning and in-class learning. We might need to think more about childcare, for example, because if we have students on sort of rotating schedules, reduced school days or reduced hours in a day would increase the need for working families. And right now we are partnering, the YMCA is providing childcare to school-age children. They are doing that at Monmouth Elementary. That is a program. Originally, when all of this happened, emergency child care provision was a huge priority, especially for healthcare workers and first responders. And so we have students in our building doing that. We are not paying for that. In fact, the YMCA was able to generously offer that care for free, pending their acquisition of donations and grants and some emergency state funding. So, but in the future, that could become something that the district has to look at in order to serve our families. The other big challenge, athletics and activities. When to resume, how to resume safely. Those discussions are going on as well.
Do we know when, for example,
Speak into your mic, Jerry.
is football and those kind of things, are they going to start about on time, or do we know?
We don't know that yet. I think that's part of some of the next steps. I think that right now, if we can only have 10 kids in a group, and when they talk about cohort, it's those kids stay together, so they go out to recess. There is no, I'm going to say, of mixing two classes together or two cohorts of 10 together. If that's the direction now, I don't know how we're going to do it. I also get concerned of how I'm going to get athletics to events. If my buses are having to run just within our town of what we're trying to do K-12. So there are some big questions still. I'm not saying that it's going to be completely out. I think that they're looking at many different avenues of what, if football doesn't go now, could it go later, right? There's lots of potential options I think that OSAA is thinking about and having conversations about. So there are no definitive answers of any of that yet.
What I've seen is, even like Major League Baseball, they're talking about postponing their season and starting sometime in November. What I'm seeing in the USA Wrestling world is that we don't anticipate being able to wrestle this year. So I'd be very surprised if we'd be able to do football, basketball, volleyball, any of those things. And it sucks, horrible. But I think sports is going to take a back seat to everything this coming year. Just seeing what I'm seeing with all the other professional sports, the professional sports doctors, USA Wrestling, the USA Wrestling doctors who are very versed in viruses because we always have to deal with that.
Yeah, and for example, singers and actors are super spreaders because the act of singing, the expectoration during singing
it spreads very much further than actual conversation.
Right. Yep. So I a friend who is a choir teacher who is not Jeff Witt, but another friend I was talking to said they've been told they may not be able to have choir for not a year, but maybe up to 2 years. So
and that's terrible, And I'm not talking just about sports,
No, that's what I mean. All these activities, I'm the way we
very much in favor of keeping our art program. The theater, the choir, the band, all of those things. I don't know if we're going to be able to have that.
Right, and I think that's part of this process. I think I'm watching our staff do amazing things with that and how they do that and how students are still doing those arts, the physical education, the music, and how they do it in a different way. I think all of that's going to be that continued conversation. You all know that I'm a big believer in all of that develops a well-rounded child or young adult, and so I think those questions of what is paused versus again, just because of safety and security. And I think that's the language we need to use right now is pause, not cut. Because, again, until I have a better idea of what and how I can bring students back in the buildings and staff safely, and then what are those guidance from the Oregon Health Association of where we go, I think all of that still, is music still a distance learning because we can't put them in groups and sing? What does that look like then? As C says, that blended look, I think, is going to be a little bit of our reality and what that might look like as we start the year. And then, again, I think that we're going to see things continue to shift in a positive way if we, are all continuing to do what we're doing, because it's clearly working in our community.
Can I do a process check? Where are we at on our agenda now?
So we're kind of moved through number 6 and a little bit of number 7, right? Just sort of talking about the process we're going to be looking at. The document that you have in front of you, I haven't really gone through, but it's all numbers that may or may not have any basis in reality. So I'll just kind of go through that briefly. That is actually all we had for slides to kind of talk to you about the thinking of the process. I'm not going to go through the document in much detail. Most of you are pretty familiar with it, and it hasn't really changed. The budget summary has a lot more information and detail. based on how we arrive at a budget, sort of what some of the explanations of funds are. And then after that introduction and summary, we have the summary of all funds, and these pages are numbered at the top right. It has called draft page number something, so I just wanted to kind of give a uniform paging for you. So draft page 15 and 16, for example, shows the summary of all of our funds. Again, we're assuming full funding on all of those. And that it does include the Student Success Act money, as I said. That money would be split sort of between salaries and training and development and some of our contracted costs. There's a placeholder in there for that. You can't really see it. It's just part of the 200 funds, which are considered our special revenue funds. Measure 98, the High School Success Act, again, is assumed here at full funding. We anticipate there will be cuts to that. That is the money that has been spent to implement the AVID learning system for our students, achievement via individual determination. It has been used to increase our career and technical education offerings, our 9th grade on track offerings, our college and career readiness programming. We have some amazing staff who've been hired through that, but there's also travel and a lot of things in there that we would be looking at once we know the effects on Measure 98. So page 15 and 16 are those same budgets, but just in different ways. One of them breaks down by the kind of expense, whether it's salaries, payroll costs, services, supplies, and the second one shows you how much we spend on each program in the district. So you can see the difference between what we spend on all elementary school instruction would include salaries and benefits and supplies and materials and contracted services like substitutes. So just a little bit of explanation about that. The staffing, and here again, this includes current positions. It also includes positions that are currently vacant, but doesn't include any added FTE that we would have otherwise considered had we known that we were going to be able to move some of these one-time expenditures out of the general fund to the student investment account. We had actually planned to use some of those monies to hire new folks in the general fund budget and get new services going there. Yeah, for example, we have an athletic trainer at the high school. We don't have those services at the middle school. So that's been something we've been hoping to add for some time. It's a contracted service, could be quite sustainable, but that was only if we could have taken some of this other money out of that budget. So that's what those pages are. Starting on page draft page 20 is actually just the general fund. And all I show you there is what that revenue looks like. You will see on the column to the left, the third column actually from the left is this year's current budget. So when we talk about what we were looking at earlier as budgeted for 1920, and comparing it to what that budget would be in 2021, you'll see how those numbers compare. And then again, the expenses in the following two pages, or following several pages, are just the general fund only, how we would spend that money by type of expense, and then on page 23 and 24, how we would spend that money by program type. So you can see how that spending would have looked very similar to the current year. I've added a new feature, pages 25 and 26, which is actually by department, taking the general fund and showing you how those budgets change over the years. This doesn't include actuals, just as the fiscal year 2019, which is started in 2018, and then the fiscal 19-20 budget, the current year we're in, and then what this 2021 budget would be at the current levels. And I think this will be valuable if we find ourselves making these drastic changes. This is going to be kind of a good barometer for us about what we've been able to invest in and how those investments would change. And then page 28 and 29 and 30 is actually, this is what we get from the state. This is that February 25th budget projection that I talked about. It shows how the state school fund is derived. Basically, the amount, when we talk about a $9 billion biennial budget, that's at the top of page 28. It is portioned so that we get 49% of that in the first year of the biennium and 51% of the total in the second year. And that's important because our costs go up each year. If we get it split evenly, then it doesn't really allow for roll-up costs. So. And I'm sure at some point, if you have questions about all of that on page 28, I'll be glad to explain that all to you sometime. But that is the numbers that we will be looking at. As the state revenue forecast comes out, folks at ODE will be taking these numbers, recalculating them, and trying to get some good guesses of where they might have savings. And then the legislature comes along and they can reallocate this or talk through some of this. They could make changes to these formulas. There's all kinds of unknowns there. That just of interest on page, draft page 30, that is actually the page that talks about our average daily membership, which is how we calculate our number of students. It's not really, we don't get paid based on enrollment. We get paid based on butts in the seats. How many kids are there in a membership over a daily average. So that ADM, average daily membership, at ADMR, which is the top line in the table, is just that daily attendance. ADMW shows that some students, understanding that they have additional needs that require additional expenditures, they get certain weightings. And so you'll notice that our ADMW, we predicted to be pretty flat. We projected that that would stay about the same in 2021 that it was in 2019-20. And those numbers are actually up. We'd had years of sort of flat or declining enrollment. Those numbers are a little bit up from prior years. And in fact, our current, our most recent numbers are actually a little higher than this. We also don't know what the effect of this situation will be on our enrollment. We anticipate that there will be students who will go to potentially online charter schools or who will have to move out of our area because of family needs or job situations, that our enrollment, which is a key piece to the money we get, is also in flux.
And I think that that's going to bring different decision-making. Last year, I had closed out of district as an example because we were full. I think that if we start to see loss of enrollment, I know that there are handfuls of families that live outside of our community that would like to be in our school system. So I think all of that is going to be a big topic of conversation again. As C said, I have a couple families that have already reached out to me that are having to move because of costs and still want to be in our school district. So I think that there's going to be a handful of things over the next month that we're going to have to continue to look at, especially as it relates to enrollment and what that looks like, because I do want to meet families where they're at. These are very different times than even a year ago as we were having the conversations about closing enrollment. So again, I think all of that process is going to be on the table again as we work through this. Because again, I want families that are in our school district, we can't control the financial, but that piece of being able to, if they can get their students here, then they're outside of the district, that doesn't involve transportation, then we're going to try and do what we can, depending on what our enrollment looks like as we go into the summer.
And financially, the state takes into account one-year fluctuations. Our state ADM is actually, we get the better of 2 years. So you're always looking at what our current year was and what the prior year was. And if you're in a declining situation, there's kind of a glide path to that. You get to use the higher enrollment, you get paid based on that, and you have an opportunity to adjust before you get a look back, which then would take it away. But at least you have that opportunity to plan. So if we did have a drop in enrollment, we would get the benefit of the doubt. And if we had an increase in enrollment, we would get the benefit of that right away. So it's always the higher of sort of the 2 years at all times. The rest of the document is about our non-general fund. And so page 32, which is the landscape page, has kind of a summary of those funds. As you see, our food service fund is rather large. All of our other special revenue funds, which includes federal grants such as title grants, our grants for students experiencing disabilities, as well as all of our student activity funds. So all of the fundraising accounts, all of the elementary readathons, as well as high school athletics and middle school activities, those are all included under special revenue funds. And then our debt service and capital improvement fund, those are not state revenues at all. So therefore, these are local revenues or in some case federally subsidized revenues, so those would not be affected. And as far as we know, we're not getting a lot of word about federal funding being reduced. So we don't anticipate really any of these taking much of a hit except in food service, because currently we get about $100,000 in sales of food. Students who don't qualify for free and reduced and actually pay. If you have a lot less kids in school, that revenue goes down. So those are those funds, and I'm not really going to go into detail about those, but that's just the rest of the book. And certainly as you take time and look over those, I would be glad to answer questions. I think if I am working mostly from home, but if you email me, we can get together on that. I think, so the process part of this, and I think, let me kind of go briefly through this, and then if anybody needs to take a break, we can, but I think we can kind of just go through it fairly quickly. We have a meeting scheduled for Monday, June 1st. If we hold that meeting, and we can get a budget approved by this committee, we would have the more information, we would take public comment, and then if you would be in a position to approve the budget, that would be the work of the budget committee. Assuming that we don't make major changes after that, the board is scheduled to meet on the 22nd to adopt the budget. If it looks like there would be major changes after the 1st, and by major changes, I mean more than 10% change in anything you approve, you would have to come back together before the board could adopt the budget. So we either have to get a really good idea of where we want to go on the meeting of the 1st, and if we don't know, this committee may have to plan to meet on the 8th. We would have to notice an additional meeting on the 8th to be able to approve a budget that could be forwarded to the board for adoption on the 22nd. If it really got crazy and you all wanted to get a lot more information, we could meet as late, this committee could meet as late as the 15th, but the board would have to move their adoption to the 29th. And the budget has to be adopted by June 30th or we don't get to operate in July. So I would hesitate to put it that far out. And if you all want to give us some guidance, or if you need to tell us what you would need to know on June 1st to be able to make a decision and approve this budget, we will get that out and get that ready for you for June 1st, if folks have an idea. Otherwise, meeting on June 1st, we may not have anything much different than this to propose.
I think Wednesday will give us some guidance. I am, again, as we work through this, depending on what happens at the legislative level, I think the 1st could be before some steps. So I just would ask you to think about that as we talk about process, because I think that's important. I think the board and those of you that have been on the committee with me, I want to be thoughtful in this process. I think we have a very good strategic plan. I think we are dealing with unique situations right now, and so we want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students, our families, and our community. So I think Cease lays out a really good point of pushing a week is probably not a huge thing. I think pushing 2 weeks could be a little bit beneficial, but that is up to you all in that discussion.
Well, one question.
I agree with you, Jen, and with Steve as well. Because we really don't know a whole lot until we hear that meeting on Wednesday. And there's not really a decision to be made today because of that. So I'm perfectly okay with that meeting in June, and I would move to approve that.
Okay, well, we have the meeting in June scheduled. We have to have another meeting because this was just a work session, and then you have to have an actual meeting with public comment. That is currently scheduled for June 1st.
Okay.
It's the choice may be if you all want us to make some further considerations or wait more, we could move that meeting until the 8th and potentially even the 15th. But Richard, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Since we don't know the magnitude of what will come up on Wednesday, it seems like we may want to try to incorporate into the budget what comes out of Wednesday, depending on what sort of major effects it would have on the budget. So I was wondering, is there some process we could go through, whether it's, just a short email exchange, or, just some sort of quick discussion that you guys, based on what you find out on Wednesday, could give us feedback as to whether it's going to be a major enough change that we should look at trying to do an iteration to incorporate what comes out of Wednesday or not.
That's a great question, and we will certainly probably send you all an email and let you know what Wednesday holds for those of you who are not spending your every waking breath on Wednesday waiting for that to come out. But Richard, we can't really have you have a discussion over email. We have to have the public meeting process. So we can share information with you, but you wouldn't be able to deliberate or feed us back information saying, gee, we'd like to see this, we'd like to see that, because that kind of has to happen in a public meeting. What we could do, if you want to give us some guidance tonight, for example, I mentioned some of those savings we think we can squeeze out of next year no matter what. And we would be glad to bring those on the 1st and sort of give you a list of options for what cuts might look like. That would give you more information on the 1st, and you could go through those. If we had a good enough picture, we could certainly make a decision that night, or we could present those and then schedule that additional meeting for the 8th. I sure hate to take up more time of yours, but schedule that additional meeting for the 8th or at the latest the 15th and really dig into those more. That would be the only way to really have you all talk through those.
Yeah, because my concern is if the numbers that come out Wednesday are along the lines of the 17% possibility, let's face it, that's a dramatically awful cut to the budget and the funding. And I'd like to see a first cut, smart look at, reducing that versus, some sort of across the board cut everything 17%, which would be a terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
So I would, if it's that dramatic, I would like to see something where you put in the alternative smart ways to cut the money and cut the pain somewhat over what a straight 17% across the board would do.
Sure. Yeah, and we wouldn't likely be able to do that well. So the across the board cuts, we're not required to do that. You all and the board get to move money around as you see fit. So, but
Yeah.
if the 17% is based on a $3 billion reduction in state revenue in the general fund. So if that comes to pass, that 17% is the only thing the governor can do, and the legislature would have to backfill or move money around. Also, by the 1st, we will know how much of that federal money we're getting. The state has $109 million, so we'll get something from that. It's not going to be very much, but we would get a little bit from that. We'll have that number by then. So, and we were just notified, if we meet on the 8th, we wouldn't be able to be here at Western, so we would all be more remote. It's a little bit more difficult, but if we plan to meet again as a committee after the 1st, we could meet here on the 15th, and then the board would have to wait until the 29th to make their adoption decision.
I would recommend that we meet on the 8th. The meeting on the 1st, which is just a half an hour before a normal board meeting, is not going to be enough time to, have the kind of discussions that we're going to need to have. So I think we need to just plan on having another meeting. And I think earlier the better. So that's why I think it should be on the 8th.
So are you suggesting to not have a budget discussion on the 1st then?
It would only be a half an hour meeting. I guess we could as kind of a checkpoint, but that half an hour is not going to allow us to get into a lot of discussion on what I think we're going to need to discuss, Mike.
Steve, I think the 1st, I think that the question would be would that budget committee go longer? And then potentially we would look at what are some key things that we would need to talk through from a board of directors meeting as well. So that part could be longer on the first if necessary. But again, that is up to you all on the direction that you would like us to go.
So I have a question for Jen and Cease. So as a board, we're very dependent on you to kind of hash out what the options are. So, I mean, anything could happen on Wednesday somewhere between 17% and 0%. So are you, not wanting to write us a blank check, but are you confident that you can have prepared some sensible options between Wednesday the 20th and June 1st?
Very much so. We've already been working through some if-thens based on the strategic plan. As C says, we've been really looking at some different cost things. So we feel, based off what we learned on Wednesday, we feel confident that we could have generally a budget to you on the first. I think if there's any nuances that maybe we are not aware of, that may be where I may reach out, or we would reach out and say, hey, the 8th might be better. Sure. Again, that's partly why we're laying this out for you all, because I think Wednesday is a very big day, but I think that even a week from Wednesday, if there's a shift in that, we just
so if something catastrophic, weird, or unnatural happens in the legislature on Wednesday, you could say, put the brakes on it. We can't get ready by the 1st or whatever. We could cancel that meeting. So I think it's best to actually have the meeting on the 1st. Is there a consensus from the board on that? Does anybody else have any opinion?
I like the idea if an iterated budget gets put out, if we can get that, say on the 1st, get the brief summary of that on the 1st, and then we'd have a longer meeting on the 8th after we've had a chance to absorb all the things that they've gone through and proposed.
I'm kind of thinking that too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, we could do that, get some general guidance from you on the 1st and have the sort of more broken down information on the 8th. Because again, if you're going
votable budget on the 8th, right? The budget that we could vote on the 8th, right?
Yeah, and then the 8th, we would take additional public comment and vote to approve. And that would still give the board time to adopt it on the 22nd. If the board at that time made changes, they would still have the opportunity to do that as long as they didn't make more than 10% changes one way or another.
So can I have a motion to make that the plan then?
I'll make that a motion that we have our meeting on the 1st to review the revised budget, and then have a meeting on the 8th to cover the details and make the final vote on the budget.
Good, that is plan A. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, is there any objection to that? Okay, I don't hear any objection on the phone. Is there any objection in the room there?
No. Cease, I just didn't hear who seconded the motion.
Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry seconded the motion. And
okay, so I believe the motion is adopted then, right?
yes, it looks like it is. So we will make the changes in the meeting notices to reflect that sort of check-in meeting on the 1st, maybe 6 to 6:45 or 7, to catch you up on what our thinking is, kind of where we're going, and ask for more guidance about how to implement that. And then notice a meeting on the 8th that will not be here at Western. That would have to be in our facility, and we'll have to figure out how to do a quality stream of that, because we don't have quite the same high capacity equipment as they do. So we will notice that, but that will probably likely be the in-person portion of that would be in our building. And then we would continue the board adoption schedule for the 22nd, and hopefully we'll be able to make that. So
I think Peggy had something to add into that.
Peggy?
I had some questions for earlier, but we've gone way past that, so I'm just going to save my questions for later.
Okay. Well, sorry, I was kind of watching you. I didn't see waving.
Okay, is there any other business that anybody has?
And I will let you know, you are all free again to email me or call me. That is perfectly okay. Again, we just kind of can't have you deliberating. But if you have individual questions or want to go over these numbers, please get a hold of me. I am free pretty much nights and weekends to be able to work through this, and would love to help you with more understanding, or Peggy, if I can answer your specific questions, that will help us get better decisions about where we want to go for you.
Okay, does anybody else have anything else for the board? No. Okay, if there's no objections, then we'll be recessed until 6 p.m. on the 1st of June.
Thank you very much.
Good, thanks.
Thanks,
Good night, everybody.
for joining in.
Everybody.
And thanks again to Woo for helping us out.
Yeah, very high quality video.